Right now, I'm standing in two states. The street I'm standing on is the state line. To my left is Bristol, Tennessee, and to my right is Bristol, Virginia. Two cities with one name, split by one main street. But this wasn't always the case. See, the original development of downtown Bristol was as one continuous settlement in 1852 by a man named Joseph Anderson. He bought 100 acres of land here from his father-in-law after learning that the land would later become a major junction for two incoming railroads, the Virginia and Tennessee Railroad from Lynchburg and the East Tennessee and Virginia Railroad from Knoxville. Anderson owned 48 acres on the Tennessee side and 52 acres on the Virginia side. On the Tennessee side of the state line boundary, he built his house, Bristol's first post office, Bristol's first bank, and Bristol's first trading post. In the same year that the railroads finally arrived in 1856, Joseph Anderson tried to incorporate the town of Bristol, which he named after the industrial city in England, as a single city that stretched into two different states. But the federal government wouldn't allow it, so he ceded the Bristol land he owned on the Virginia side to another landowner, Samuel E. Goodson, who incorporated the town of Goodson, Virginia, while Anderson incorporated the town of Bristol, Tennessee. Through the Civil War and the Reconstruction era, the two separate towns developed simultaneously along Main Street, each building their own hotels, warehouse buildings, and dozens of trading posts and storefronts. Even though the town of Goodson was incorporated as Goodson, the train depot on the Virginia side still bore its original Bristol name. So in 1890, Goodson was renamed back to Bristol, to avoid confusion. Up until 1901, the official state line boundary was actually cutting off the sidewalk on the Virginia side of Bristol, but eventually the two states reached an agreement to move the official boundary to the center of Main Street, which was then renamed State Street. With the state line now directly running down the center of the main commercial street, downtown Bristol continued to develop symmetrically, simultaneously from that point on. As it stands today, it's a pretty awkward setup. Evidently, the two states have two very different governments. During the pandemic, the one in 2020, not 1918, the governors of the two states chose different schedules for reopening businesses after the lockdown era. At one point, restaurants on the Tennessee side were open for indoor dining, but on the Virginia side, only takeout and delivery were allowed. Virginia is a recreational cannabis state, and in 2026 will begin to open its first full-service recreational dispensaries. Meanwhile, as of 2026, marijuana is still illegal in Tennessee for recreational use. The Virginia side of downtown Bristol has a top marginal state income tax of 5.75%, while just across the street, Bristol, Tennessee, has no state income tax. Bristol, Tennessee has been steadily gaining population ever since its first census in 1880. It has a population of around 27,000. Meanwhile, Bristol, Virginia has been losing population since the 1990 census and has around 17,000 residents. The cities each have their own downtown bars, restaurants, gift shops, clothing stores, theaters, banks. They even have their own police departments and city halls. They each have their own mayor and city councils. On paper, Bristol is two different cities, but at street level, you'd be hard-pressed to find any real difference between the two. After all, for all that they don't share, they do share this one main street, this one downtown, and many of their most important historical beats. Walking around downtown is as fascinating as you'd imagine. When I first got here, I made my way west to east down State Street, with a starting point, of course, at the 3 Welcome to Bristol signs. One for Tennessee, one for Virginia, and a third symbolizing the combined spirit of a unified Bristol for good measure. Both sides of the street have their own Art Deco theater. Virginia has the Cameo, built in 1925, and Tennessee has the Paramount, built in 1931. Throughout the 20th century, both sides of the street developed mixed-use buildings with offices and residences up top and shops and restaurants down below. Both the Virginia and Tennessee sides of the street experienced the same architectural and commercial evolution. They have buildings that were originally built as warehouses and factories that became abandoned and were either adaptively reused or torn down and replaced with surface parking, or a new building in a new architectural age. It's the sort of development patterns that you see across the industrial southeast, but of course, here it's especially unique. Each side of the street is eager to let you know exactly what state you are in. From the many flags decorating the lampposts to the logos stamped on the sewer grates along the sidewalks. All the way at the eastern end of State Street, you'll find two of my favorite landmarks in the city. First, Bristol Union Station. It's the fourth railroad depot built on this site since Bristol was founded, and it was home to that original depot that the original town of Bristol was established around. This iteration was built in 1902 for the Norfolk and Western Railway, which later became Norfolk Southern. Passenger service to Bristol Station ended with the discontinuation of the Birmingham Special on April 30th, 1971. However, in 2023, the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation was awarded a grant of up to $500,000 to study the extension of Amtrak's Northeast Regional Service to Bristol, Virginia. The proposed corridor would extend the existing state-supported Amtrak Northeast Regional Service between Washington, D.C. and Roanoke, Virginia, adding an extension all the way to Bristol and infill stations in Bedford and Christiansburg, Virginia, respectively. The Virginia Passenger Rail Authority and Norfolk Southern agreed on plans to extend its state-supported Amtrak service to the New River Valley part of Virginia by 2028, and from there, the next extension would be for Bristol. And from there, it could even bring back passenger service through cities like Knoxville, Chattanooga, and Huntsville, to eventually be reconnected back down with the Crescent in Birmingham. Sitting beside the station is, a fourth Welcome to Bristol sign, but this one's a little different and a lot older. It's what's called a slogan sign. Apparently, some cities used to have that back in the early 1900s. The sign is so large that it stretches across State Street, with one leg in Virginia and one in Tennessee. The sign was built in 1910 and originally featured the slogan, "Push, that's Bristol." It moved to the state line in 1915, and the slogan was later refreshed in 1921 to read, "Bristol, a good place to live." In 1988, the sign itself was added to the National Register of Historic Places. There's one claim to fame Bristol has that you just can't miss after spending any amount of time walking around downtown. Bristol is the birthplace of country music. On both sides of downtown, Bristol is covered in country music murals, plaques, signs. Hell, they've even got speakers pumping out country music all day long along State Street. It was right here in 1927, in a building at the southwest corner of State and Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, that talent scout Ralph Peer made the very first commercially produced country music recordings with the Carter family, Jimmy Rogers, and others for the Victor Talking Machine Company. Those recordings later became known as the Bristol Sessions, recognized internationally as the Big Bang of country music. You can learn all about that early country music history and country music in and around Appalachia more broadly here at the Birthplace of Country Music Museum on the Virginia side of downtown. Tickets cost $13 for adults, $11 for students, and even though it's never been my genre of choice, when you're spending the day at the Birthplace of Country Music, you're going to want to check out the Birthplace of Country Music Museum. So after exploring most of what State Street and downtown had to offer, I wanted to venture far beyond the beaten path into the parts of these strange cities that aren't often shown on camera. So, after a quick bite at the Burger Bar, circa 1941, I did just that. I started on the Virginia side, walking 2 blocks north to a neighborhood called Solar Hill. The neighborhood was the first major residential expansion of Bristol/Goodson, and was where the city's most wealthy built their homes during the Reconstruction era and the following Gilded Age. Many of those original Victorian, Edwardian, Colonial Revival, and Neoclassical homes are still standing and in great condition. Unfortunately, many homes have also fallen under disrepair, with a couple well past the point of saving. By the way, have you figured out yet what time of the year I visited? I'll give you one guess. Anyway, Solar Hill gets its name from an observatory that was built here to view the great solar eclipse of August 7th, 1869. At the time, the federal government even sent down a few agents from Washington, D.C., from the U.S. Coast Survey, the first scientific agency of the U.S. government, to document the eclipse. While the observatory itself no longer exists, it's been said that the stones from the structure were actually used as a foundation for the very first home that was built at the corner of Solar and Cumberland Streets. Though since there isn't a single image of the observatory online, I have no reference point to even attempt to figure out which one of these homes was the one that was built atop the old observatory blocks. In 2004, Solar Hill was the recipient of a Virginia DOT grant that gave the city more than $500,000 to spend on upgrading sidewalks, installing street lamps, and erecting around a dozen historical markers and plaques throughout the neighborhood. My favorite plaque is probably this one, located on an empty lot on Oak Street. There's clearly some unique history here. It's the sort of thing that makes exploring neighborhoods like this my favorite thing to do when I'm in these types of cities. It's a great way to feel like you're stepping into the past, and when you do it enough in cities all across the US, you can begin to paint this really vibrant picture of what America might have been like during that particular time in history. For me, here in Solar Hill, Bristol, Virginia, it was the 1870s. The neighborhood of Solar Hill was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 2001. From Solar Hill, I walked across the closed Oak Street Bridge and ventured east over Beaver Creek and the Norfolk Southern right-of-way. The deeper I wandered into Bristol, Virginia, the more apparent and obvious the urban decay became. Yeah, there were homes that were straight up just falling apart. But beyond the abandoned homes, the abandoned industry was perhaps more telling of the overall state of Bristol, Virginia in 2026. One of the last remaining abandoned facilities that still stands on this side of town is the former Columbian Paper Company plant, built in the early 1890s. Now look, I'm not fully dedicated to the whole Urbex thing, but I just couldn't resist taking a closer look at this absolutely massive facility. If I'm being honest, I thought the abandoned site was really beautiful actually. Unexpectedly so. The paper mill was built during a time in which Bristol was just starting to come into its own as a manufacturing hub. After the mill was constructed and acquired by the Columbia Company, it was expanded over and over again. At one point in time, the paper mill even featured a rail spur that fed into it. For which exact railroad company, I'm not exactly sure. The remnants of the train trestle, pictured beside the old smokestack, made for such a striking scene to capture on camera. And to think the city was once covered in places like this. It's almost unimaginable given the state of a site like this today. The mill was used to make paper in Bristol, Virginia until 1954. Nearby the abandoned paper mill, I discovered yet another interesting industrial site, the former J.C. Lehman Bottling Company building. This was built squeezed to fit along a railroad spur back in 1910, which gave the brick structure its unique, skinny, curved shape that I found really interesting. The bottling company itself was founded as a wholesale fruit, vegetable, and confectionery distributor before it began bottling soft drinks in 1915. Most notably, a mint cola for the Maysville Syrup Company out of Maysville, Kentucky. The building changed hands in 1929 when it was sold to the Teneva Overall Company, and then in 1935 to the Jobbers Candy Company, who kept it until 1977. Coincidentally, I later found another former facility of the Jobbers Candy Company as I was scanning for ghost signs earlier along State Street. This one is part of the current Sessions Hotel, one of two impressive modern downtown hotels on the Virginia side of Bristol. No matter where I am in the country, of course, I'll always find the town's old Cress building. I've mentioned it before, and I'm gonna make a whole video on all the dozens of Cress buildings I found across the country. But 100 years or so ago, Cress was a Main Street staple across America. This building on the Tennessee side of Bristol used to be a five and dime store. But like most Cress buildings I find these days, it sits vacant. I like walking around these alleyways between old buildings and old downtowns. It's where I often find the best ghost signs, and most of the time they look exactly like this. The ever-present, delicious, refreshing Coca-Cola ghost sign, likely of the late 1910s or early 1920s. From here, I eventually found my way down to the Tennessee side of downtown, just a few blocks south of State Street, and wouldn't you know it, I found even more missing links of the city's past. This building used to be a factory and warehouse for the L.C. King Manufacturing Company, who's been making high-quality clothes in Bristol, Tennessee since 1913. It's no longer used to make overalls, coveralls, dungarees, slacks, work pants, or shirts anymore, but instead houses a massive CrossFit gym. Across Shelby Street, I found the rubble of what used to be a place called Hecht's Bakery, which was built here in 1920 and demolished exactly a century later in 2020. For what reason, I'm not exactly sure. Like I said, this corner is packed with Bristol history on all sides, even stuff dating back to the American Revolution, which you can read about on the side of the E.W. King Warehouse building. This plaque tells one of the earliest stories that happened on the land that would later become the city of Bristol, Tennessee. Bristol's original American settler, a trapper and militia officer named Evan Shelby, established a fort here to protect the area's pioneers from native attacks. It was later used as a jumping-off point for American forces en route to these 3 battles of the American Revolutionary War. Around the corner, and in front of the old Bristol Post Office and Custom House, is a larger plaque detailing the events leading up to the Revolutionary War victory at the Battle of Kings Mountain, which was led by Evan Shelby's son, Isaac Shelby, in 1780, who later became the first governor of a brand new state called Kentucky, which I also happened to visit the capital of as a part of this road trip. My second to last stop in Bristol was pretty unexpected. It was actually something I saw while making my way out of town that made me just stop in my tracks. It was a high school. I can't say I featured any of those on this channel before, but there's a first time for everything, and I am really glad I took the time to check this place out. This is Tennessee High School, home to the Bristol Municipal Stadium, a high school athletic facility with its own Wikipedia page and a National Register of Historic Places designation. The facility was built during the New Deal by the Works Progress Administration and constructed out of limestone rubble that was left over from a different WPA project nearby in Beaver Creek. Completed in 1936, it was built in this sort of medieval Gothic style, with many details you just never see on any structure in America. Crenellated parapet walls, an arched, wood-gated entrance, and these unique-looking cornered defense towers. It's such a fun thing to see as an American because, yeah, it's a building completely out of time. It's inauthentic by definition. But at the same time, being that it was constructed in the 1930s, in the context of American history, this was built in an America that's almost as foreign as medieval London would be to a modern-day Londoner. As I pulled away from the city proper and entered the crawl along Veterans Parkway, the sheen of uniqueness sort of washed itself away. In many ways, outside of its odd historic downtown, the suburban sprawl part of Bristol is the same as really any other town in America. This country is just so beautiful. It's just too bad that most of it has been paved over with seas of surface parking, fast food, car dealerships, and just wasted space in general. It seems so thoughtless, and in a place this beautiful, I guess it just hits a bit harder than usual. Before I hit the open road completely, there was this absolutely massive building that came into view that I just couldn't keep myself from checking out. This monstrosity on the side of the road is the Bristol Motor Speedway. I'm gonna be honest, I don't really have any interest in race cars or cars in general, so I didn't even know this was here when I was planning my trip to the city. But apparently this is something of a motorsport mecca. It's the 5th largest motor racing venue by capacity in the world, which also makes it the world's 11th largest sports venue by capacity, period, at 153,000. It was built here in 1961. The sheer scale of this place, I've never seen anything like it. The camera just isn't doing it any justice. But on most days, this place is empty, just sitting here between the rolling hills of red, yellow, and orange. I got close enough to take a peek, but that's about all there was to do here. Before I left town entirely, I spent some time collecting my thoughts along the West Davis Greenway, a half-mile rail trail built atop the former Southern Railway alignment running along Beaver Creek on the Tennessee side of town. As the sun set, I ended my day admiring this old 1940s Pullman passenger car, which, for me, was the best way I could have ended my time in this fascinating city. Or cities, I guess. All in all, both Bristols are just fascinating. So many hidden gems, and even if you're just here to take a photo op standing on State Street, it's well worth the detour. But if you do have the extra time, venture out a little further beyond State Street, because there's plenty more to these strange state-line cities than the maps might suggest. Anyway, I'll see you next week, right here, from 4th Place.